Unknown. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, 2,200 hours. In the suffocating darkness of the Solomon Islands, Private Robert Young Deere of the 604th Infantry Regiment checks his M1 Garand rifle one final time. His unit had arrived on the island just 11 days earlier on October 13th, becoming the first U.S. Army formation to engage in offensive operations against the Japanese. Now in positions alongside Marines, still armed with bolt-action Springfield rifles, the soldiers of the 604th gripped their semi-automatic weapons, 8 rounds loaded in each en-bloc clip. Through the oppressive humidity and the cacophony of nocturnal insects comes a sound that freezes the blood of every American soldier. Thousands of Japanese troops beginning their charge, screaming banzai and totsugeki at the top of their lungs. Among the attacking force, Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto of the 29th Infantry Regiment leads his platoon forward. His Type 38 Arisaka rifle with its exceptionally long 31.4-inch barrel proving unwieldy in the dense undergrowth. The 5-round internal magazine has been loaded with 6.5 by 50 mm Arisaka rounds, each one requiring him to work the bolt action to chamber, up, back, forward, down. Behind him, some newer troops carry the Type 99 rifle chambered in the more powerful 7.7 by 58 mm cartridge, but still bolt action, still limited to 5 rounds before reloading with stripper clips. What happens in the next 12 hours of savage combat will demonstrate why American infantry possessed an overwhelming advantage in firepower that the Japanese never anticipated. The technological gap between the semi-automatic M1 Garand and the bolt-action Arisaka rifles would prove as decisive as any tactical doctrine, revealing how industrial innovation and mass production could determine the outcome of infantry combat in the world's first truly modern war. The battle about to unfold at Henderson Field would showcase a fundamental truth of the Pacific War. While Japanese soldiers displayed extraordinary courage and determination, they were handicapped by rifle technology that belonged to the previous war. The M1 Garand's semi-automatic action, 8-round capacity and powerful 36 Springfield cartridge gave American forces a rate of fire and stopping power that Japanese infantry armed with bolt-action Arisaka rifles simply could not match. This disparity in small arms capability would be multiplied across thousands of engagements throughout the Pacific theater, from the steaming jungles of New Guinea to the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, contributing significantly to the eventual American victory. The M1 Garand emerged from the mind of Canadian-American designer John Cantius Garand, who began work at Springfield Armory in 19... After 17 years of development, testing, and refinement, the U.S. Army officially adopted his design on January 9, 1936, making America the first nation to issue a semi-automatic rifle as standard equipment to its infantry forces. The rifle fired the powerful .30-06 Springfield cartridge, launching a 150-grain M2 ball projectile at 2,805 foot from its 24-inch barrel, generating 2,656 foot of muzzle energy. The genius of Garand's design lay in its gas-operated rotating bolt system. A small portion of propellant gas was tapped from a port near the muzzle, driving an operating rod that cycled the action automatically. Each pull of the trigger fired 1 round, with the gas pressure automatically ejecting the spent case and chambering the next round without any manual intervention from the shooter. A trained soldier could accurately fire between 40 and 50 aimed shots per minute, compared to the 15 to 20 rounds per minute achievable with a bolt-action rifle. The 8-round unblocked clip inserted from above into the fixed magazine could be reloaded in under 3 seconds by a practiced rifleman. The development process had not been without challenges. Early prototypes used a primer-actuated system that proved unreliable. The rifle was originally designed for the Toneron 7.6 Peterson cartridge, but General Douglas MacArthur intervened in 1932, insisting on retention of the Toneron 6 Springfield round to utilize existing ammunition stockpiles. This decision delayed production, but ultimately proved fortuitous as the powerful Toneron 6 cartridge provided excellent long-range performance and stopping power. The Arisaka rifles trace their lineage to Colonel Nariakira Arisaka's original Type 30 design of 1897, developed to replace the inadequate Murata rifles then in service. By World War II, Japanese forces primarily fielded 2 variants, the Type 38, adopted in 1905, and the Type 99, introduced in 1939, the 2599th year of the Japanese calendar. The Type 38 fired the 6.5 by 50 mm semi-rimmed cartridge with a 139-grain bullet at 2,500 foot, generating approximately 1,650 bullets of muzzle energy. The Type 99 used the more powerful 7.7 by 58 mm cartridge, firing a 182-grain bullet at 2,400 foot with 2,300 foot of energy.
Both Arisaka variants were bolt-action rifles with 5-round internal magazines loaded via 5-round stripper clips. The Type 38's exceptional 31.4-inch barrel length made it one of the longest infantry rifles ever fielded, contributing to excellent long-range accuracy, but proving extremely cumbersome in jungle combat, where engagement distances rarely exceeded 100 yards. The Type 99, with its shorter 25.9-inch barrel, was more manageable but arrived too late to fully replace the Type 38 in service. The Arisaka action itself was remarkably strong. Post-war testing proved it stronger than the American Springfield, British Lee Enfield, or German Mauser actions. The rifles featured an innovative safety mechanism that could be operated silently, and the bolt design incorporated a gas escape system to protect the shooter in case of a ruptured cartridge case. However, these engineering achievements could not overcome the fundamental limitation of manual bolt operation in an era of increasing firepower. The industrial disparity between America and Japan became starkly apparent in rifle production figures. Between 1936 and 1945, American factories produced approximately 5.4 million M1 Garand rifles. Springfield Armory led production with 3.5 million rifles, while Winchester Repeating Arms Company contributed 530. International Harvester and Harrington and Richardson would add additional production during the Korean War. Peak production at Springfield Armory reached 1,000 rifles per day by January 1944, with Winchester achieving 600 rifles daily at their height. This massive output ensured that virtually every American infantry soldier and Marine in the Pacific carried the semi-automatic rifle by mid-1943. The U.S. military's allocation system prioritized combat units, with the Marine Corps receiving 22,000 M1 Garands per month in early 1943 despite their initial reluctance to adopt the rifle. By the end of fiscal year 1942, the Marine Corps possessed 62,886 M1 Garands, though not all had reached frontline units. Japanese production presented a starkly different picture. From 1905 to 1945, Japan manufactured approximately 3 million Type 38 rifles across multiple arsenals, including Koishikawa, later Tokyo, Kokura, Nagoya, and Mukden Arsenal in occupied Manchuria. Type 99 production from 1939 to 1945 reached roughly 3.5 million units manufactured at 9 different arsenals, including 2 outside Japan proper, Mukden in Manchukuo and Jinzen in Korea. Despite these substantial numbers, totaling over 6 million rifles, Japan never achieved the production rates necessary to fully modernize their infantry arms. Many second-line troops, garrison forces, and naval infantry units still carried Type 38 rifles at war's end, creating logistics complications with 2 different ammunition types in use. American M1 Garand production maintained remarkably consistent quality throughout the war. Springfield Armory's quality control procedures rejected any rifle that failed to group within 5 inches at 100 yards. Interchangeability of parts between rifles from different manufacturers was strictly enforced through detailed specifications and gauging requirements.
A damaged M1 Garand could be fixed right on the battlefield using parts taken from other rifles, no matter who made them. In fact, when the U.S. adopted better heat treatment methods in 1942, it made the rifle's receiver even stronger than the pre-war versions. The changes to its finish weren't about saving money, but about making it more practical. Switching from blued steel to parkerized metal gave it much better resistance to rust and corrosion, especially in humid tropical climates. Because walnut wood became hard to get during the war, the classic walnut stocks were replaced with birch and other hardwoods, but that didn't hurt performance at all. As the war went on, some parts were simplified. For example, milled trigger guards were replaced with stamped ones, yet every change was tested thoroughly to make sure reliability stayed the same. Japan's rifle production, on the other hand, took a serious hit in quality as the war dragged on. Early Type 99 rifles were actually quite advanced for their time. They had chrome-lined barrels, the first military rifles ever to use that feature, foldable anti-aircraft sights for aiming at planes, protective dust covers, and even built-in wire monopods for extra stability. The early models had a beautiful deep blue finish and were made from high-quality hardwoods with excellent craftsmanship. By 1944, though, most of those refinements were gone due to material shortages and pressure to speed up production. The later last-ditch rifles were much rougher. Machining marks everywhere, simple fixed rear sights instead of adjustable ones, wooden butt plates instead of metal, and lower-quality wood that fit poorly. Some of the very last rifles were so rushed that they weren't even polished. Tool marks were visible on every metal surface. Chrome lining disappeared because Japan ran out of chromium. The monopods were dropped, and even the imperial chrysanthemum symbol was crudely stamped instead of neatly engraved. The M1 Garand's semi-automatic action gave American soldiers big tactical advantages, not just in firing speed but in accuracy too. After every shot, the rifle automatically cycled, so the shooter didn't have to break his aim or lift his cheek off the stock. That meant faster target reacquisition and tighter follow-up shots. The gas-operated system, which used pressure tapped near the muzzle, was strong enough to work even when the rifle was full of mud, sand, or carbon buildup. Some people criticized the M1 for the famous ping sound it made when the clip ejected, supposedly giving away that the rifle was empty. But in reality, the clip system allowed incredibly fast reloads. A trained soldier could reload in less than 3 seconds, compared to 5 to 7 seconds for a bolt-action rifle using stripper clips. The ejected clip also made it obvious by sound and feel that the rifle was empty, reducing confusion in combat. At 9.5 pounds, the M1 Garand was heavy by today's standards, but that weight helped absorb recoil from the powerful 20-30-06 cartridge. Its 43.6-inch length was well balanced, thanks to the solid stock and heavy barrel. The two-stage trigger wasn't fancy, but it was consistent and easy to master with training. Japanese Arisaka rifles, although tough and potentially very accurate, suffered from the limitations of bolt-action design, a major problem in the close, fast-paced combat of the Pacific. After each shot, the soldier had to lift the bolt handle, pull it back to eject the spent case, push it forward again to load a new round, and lock it down, 4 separate motions that broke aim and took several seconds. The long Type 38 rifle, at more than 50 inches, was a nightmare in jungle fighting. It got caught on vines and was hard to maneuver in tight spaces like bunkers. While its long barrel gave great accuracy at range, that advantage didn't matter much in the Pacific, where most fights happened within 100 yards. Its 5-round magazine meant Japanese troops had to reload more often, about 60% more than American soldiers. Reloading with stripper clips was slow and awkward, especially under fire. The M1 used the standard .30-06 Springfield cartridge, the same one used in several other U.S. weapons like the M193 Springfield, M190-17 Browning, and BAR. That made logistics far easier. One type of ammo for rifles, automatics, and machine guns. U.S. ammo production was enormous. The Lake City plant alone made 200 million rounds a year by 1943, and other plants like Frankfurt Arsenal and Denver Ordnance produced hundreds of millions more. Quality control was tight, with very little variation between batches. Japan, in contrast, struggled with a confusing mix of ammunition. Units with Type 38 rifles needed 6.5 by 50 mm semi-rimmed rounds, while those using Type 99s needed 7.7 by 58 mm. The 6.5 mm ammo was light and easy to carry, but too weak against fortifications. The 7.7 mm solved that issue, but created a supply nightmare. Now 2 types of rifle ammo had to be distributed. That confusion often caused real problems. For example, during the Guadalcanal campaign, some Japanese units received 7.7 mm ammo for their 6.5 mm rifles, completely useless. Similar mistakes happened in the Philippines and on remote island garrisons. The semi-rim design of the 6.5 mm cartridge also made feeding less reliable in humid, tropical conditions. When the U.S. Army's 164th Infantry Regiment, a National Guard unit from North Dakota, landed on Guadalcanal in October 1942, they brought something the Marines had been wishing for, the M1 Garand. At Guadalcanal, the Marines, who were still mostly using M193 Springfield bolt-action rifles, watched the Army troops come ashore with semi-automatic Garands and felt a mix of envy and skepticism. That changed fast during the fierce fight for Henderson Field on October 24-25, 1942, when the practical advantages of the M1 became impossible to ignore. Staff Sergeant Mitchell Page, a Marine machine gunner fighting alongside soldiers from the 164th Infantry, saw it up close. Private James Cass of Company M later remembered the Japanese assault. They came in waves through the darkness, bayonets flashing. Cass said that with the Garands they could put 8 rounds into the attackers before they covered 30 yards. Each man with a Garand could deliver the volume of fire of a whole machine gun section. You squeezed and fired repeatedly without working a bolt or breaking your cheek weld. Squeeze, bang, 8 shots before reloading. The fresh companies of the 164th were fed into lines that were starting to give, and the Garand's devastating semi-automatic fire helped stabilize the situation. Colonel Bryant Moore reported that his men expended more than 250,000 rounds of .306 in that 2-day fight. The rapid, accurate fire of the M1 put mountains of Japanese dead in front of the 164th's positions. Marine Robert Leckie, who later wrote Helmet for My Pillow, wrote that the new Army troops looked green, but when the Japanese charged, those Garands roared like nothing the Marines had heard, a continuous wall of fire compared with the occasional cracks of their Springfields. From the Japanese side, Sergeant Masao Watanabe of the 29th Infantry later reflected that pre-war assumptions about American soldiers and their softness were shattered. Officers had boasted one Japanese soldier was worth 10 Americans, but charging those lines that October felt like running into a wall of lead. Every American seemed to carry an automatic weapon. The Arisaka bolt actions they used felt like antiques.
While a Japanese soldier worked the bolt and took cover between shots, the Americans had already fired 4 or 5 rounds. Tactics developed against Chinese forces, who often had older weapons or limited ammunition, were suicidal against this firepower. The banzai charges that overwhelmed Chinese conscripts simply disintegrated before Americans, whose rifles never seemed to stop firing. They could not close to fixed bayonets. Our supposed advantage in spirit and close fighting meant nothing when men were cut down 50 meters from the line. Lieutenant Hiroshi Takahashi wrote in a note found on his body that American automatic rifles were devastating. In an advance, it seemed as if the position was defended entirely by machine guns. At Cape Gloucester in December 1943, Marines of the 1st Marine Division, now equipped with M1 Garands after their experience on Guadalcanal, landed in pouring rain on New Britain. Eugene Sledge, and with the old breed, later praised the Garand's reliability. In waterfall-like rain and clinging mud, the rifle kept firing. Japanese bolt-action rifles could not match that rate of fire. When the enemy tried to emplace positions in the jungle, Marines could pour so much lead into the trees the leaves fell like rain. Sergeant John Basilone, later a Medal of Honor recipient for his actions at Guadalcanal, carried an M1 and noted it gave each man roughly the firepower of 3 bolt rifle soldiers. In the jungle, where you might only get a glimpse of the enemy for a second, being able to fire several rounds without working a bolt often meant killing the foe before he killed you. At Saipan in June 1944, during the largest banzai charge of the Pacific War, more than 3,000 Japanese soldiers attacking pre-dawn Marines with Garands played critical roles. On July 7th, Private Harold Agerholm of the 4th Marine Division helped repel the assault. Corporal John Miller recalled the attackers shoulder to shoulder, screaming while the Garands kept going. The constant ping of empty clips ejecting became almost a grim music as Marines poured out round after round. The Japanese bolt actions could not match that volume. They might get 1 or 2 shots off before being cut down. On Peleliu in September 1944, the Japanese shifted to defense and fortifications instead of banzai charges, but even then the Arisaka remained inferior. Corporal R.V. Bergen recalled that a small group of Marines with Garands could saturate a cave mouth with 40 rounds in the time it took defenders to fire 5 or 6 shots back. Keeping defenders suppressed allowed other Marines to close with flamethrowers or demolitions. American training also emphasized how to use the Garand's semi-automatic capability while maintaining accuracy. At training camps across the United States, Fort Benning, Camp Perry, and many others, soldiers spent weeks drilling with their rifles, learning to put fast, accurate fire down range. That continual, standardized training turned the Garand into not just a weapon, but a force multiplier in young hands.
The U.S. Army's standard rifle qualification course trained soldiers to hit targets from 100 to 500 yards, focusing on quick, accurate shooting and smooth trigger control. The Army's Field Manual 23-5, which covered the M1 rifle, set an ambitious combat goal, a sustained rate of 40 to 50 well-aimed shots per minute. Training emphasized keeping a steady sight picture, maintaining alignment through each shot without breaking position. Because the rifle's semi-automatic action eliminated the need to work a bolt, soldiers were taught to fire, observe the impact, adjust, and fire again in one fluid sequence, fully exploiting what the Garand could do. Ammunition for training was generous by any standard. Basic trainees fired at least 210 rounds just for qualification, with far more used in advanced exercises. Units preparing for deployment often went through thousands of rounds per soldier. That heavy live-fire training built the muscle memory and confidence that paid off in combat. At first, the Marine Corps had doubts about the M1 Garand, worried that its faster rate of fire would waste ammunition or reduce the focus on precision shooting. But once they adopted it, the Marines took training even further. Their doctrine stressed accurate volume of fire, not spraying bullets but firing rapid, well-aimed shots while preserving the Corps' legendary marksmanship standards. Japanese training followed a completely different philosophy. Rooted in samurai traditions, it revolved around the principle of ichigeki hisatsu, one strike, certain kill. It reflected both a spiritual belief in the warrior's focus and the practical limits of bolt-action rifles. Japanese infantry trained extensively for long-range accuracy, where the Type 38 rifle excelled. Their manuals even stated the spirit of the attack is the primary weapon. The rifle and bayonet are merely extensions of the warrior's will. That mindset, elevating spirit over material capability, would prove disastrous in the Pacific. Japanese troops drilled constantly with bayonets and prized the Type 38's long length for close combat. But in the dense jungles of Guadalcanal or New Guinea,
Visibility rarely stretched beyond a few yards. The banzai charges that had terrified Chinese or colonial troops became massacres against the unbroken storm of semi-automatic rifle fire. The sound of massed Garands became a weapon all its own, a fast, rhythmic crack punctuated by the metallic ping of empty clips ejecting. It had a crushing psychological effect. A captured Japanese manual from 1943 even tried to prepare troops for it. The American automatic rifles create a sound like many machine guns. Do not be discouraged. Remember your spiritual superiority. But morale could not overcome physics. Captured soldier Yukio Nakamura told his interrogators, "We were told Americans were weak, that they relied on machines, but their rifles fired without stopping. It was like fighting a machine, not men. We never got close enough to use our bayonets." American troops, by contrast, drew enormous confidence from their firepower. Marine Corporal James Russell recalled, "Knowing you could put 8 rounds downrange as fast as you could pull the trigger, it made you feel unstoppable. When the Japs charged, you didn't panic. You just started shooting until they stopped coming, or you heard that ping telling you to reload." At the squad level, the difference was staggering. A typical American squad, 12 men, 10 with M1 Garands and 2 with Browning automatic rifles, could fire 400 to 500 aimed shots per minute. A comparable Japanese squad, armed with Arisaka rifles, might manage only 150 to 180. That changed everything about small unit tactics. American squads could lay down continuous suppressive fire while another team maneuvered forward, classic fire and movement. Japanese squads, limited by their slower rifles, simply couldn't match that tempo. At the company level, the effect was overwhelming. A U.S. rifle company of 200 men could unleash an incredible wall of lead in defense. During the October 24-25 battle for Henderson Field, Company G of the 164th Infantry fired 30,000 rounds of 32.06 in one night, an average of 150 rounds per man, while taking only light losses. The math was merciless. A Japanese battalion of 800 charging troops faced American units capable of putting 8,000 aimed shots into the air every minute. Even in the confusion of night fighting, that firepower created kill zones that no amount of courage could breach. The Garand's superiority directly supported America's island-hopping strategy. Troops landing on Japanese-held islands could dig in and hold beachheads against counterattacks thanks to their rifle firepower. M1-equipped infantry meant smaller defensive forces could hold larger areas while reinforcements built up. From Tarawa to Saipan, Guam, Palaliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, the same pattern repeated. Unable to match American firepower, Japanese forces turned to desperate tactics. Banzai charges gave way to defensive tunnels and caves, but even there, the slow bolt-action rifles left them unable to exploit fleeting chances in battle. Much of Japan's attachment to the Arisaka rifle came from earlier triumphs. In the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905, Japanese infantry armed with early Arisakas had beaten the Russians through discipline, training, and courage. Victories at Mukden and Port Arthur seemed to prove that moral strength could overcome material inferiority. That success, however, blinded the military establishment. Dominated by officers who worshipped that earlier war as Japan's moment of glory, they failed to see that the world and warfare had completely changed.
World War I made one thing painfully clear. Firepower had overtaken mere elan on the battlefield. Japan, having been only marginally involved in that war, did not fully absorb that lesson. The American move to adopt the M1 Garand grew out of the hard experience of 1918. General John J. Pershing, who led the American Expeditionary Force in France, had seen firsthand how automatic weapons transformed combat. He argued for a semi-automatic service rifle, saying that the soldier who could deliver the most accurate fire in the shortest time would dominate the battlefield of the future, and that demand set the development path that eventually led to the Garand. The United States spent almost 2 decades refining the concept, design trials, testing, and building the factories to make the rifle at scale. By the time the M1 was officially adopted in 1936, America did not just have a better rifle, it had an entire system to produce, maintain, and supply it. Japan, belatedly, recognized the need for semi-automatic small arms and began indigenous work in the 1930s. Kajiro Nambu and others produced prototypes and gas-operated designs. But those programs were low priority. Resources flowed instead to planes, ships, and other projects the High Command judged more urgent. When Japan finally tried to copy the Garand, the so-called Type 4 rifle, often mislabeled Type 5, the result shows how far behind they were. Only about 250 part sets were completed, and perhaps 100 to 125 rifles assembled by war's end. The Type 4, chambered for 7.7 millimeters and fed from a 10-round internal magazine, loaded with 2 5-round stripper clips, proved that Japanese engineers understood the Garand's advantages, but they simply lacked the industrial base to produce it in quantity. Once you run the numbers, the American advantage becomes stark. An M1 firing M2 ball produced roughly 2,656 foot-pounds of muzzle energy at a trained soldier's sustained rate of 40 rounds per minute. That equals about 106,240 foot-pounds delivered per minute. By contrast, a bolt-action Type 99 firing the 7.7mm round delivered around 2,300 foot-pounds per shot at a practical rate of 15 aimed rounds per minute. That is only about 34,500 foot-pounds per minute, less than one-third of the Garand's energy output. Ballistically, the Bolt 3006 Springfield also proved superior in typical Pacific fighting ranges. At 300 yards, already a long shot in the jungle, the Bolt 3006 dropped about 13.5 inches from the line of sight, but still retained roughly 1,900 foot-pounds of energy, enough to punch through foliage and incapacitate a man. The 6.5mm Arisaka, although it dropped only slightly less, retained only about 1,100 foot-pounds at that range, and often lacked the power to penetrate cover. U.S. ordnance tests at Aberdeen Proving Ground in 1940 quantified the advantage. In trials, soldiers with M1s could produce about 24 aimed shots per minute at 200 yards with roughly 90% hit probability on man-sized targets. Troops with bolt-action Springfields managed only 10 aimed shots with about 85% accuracy. In rapid-fire scenarios, simulating sudden attack, M1 crews could engage 3 separate targets in the time bolt-action troops handled 1. Over sustained firing, Garand teams retained far more of their initial rate. After 5 minutes, M1 teams kept about 80% of their rate, while bolt-action crews fell to about 60% from fatigue and the physical work of operating the bolt. Those mechanical differences had battlefield consequences. At Guadalcanal, Army units equipped with M1s expended roughly 150 to 200 rounds per man per day in heavy fighting. Marine units still using Springfields fired only 60 to 80 rounds per man in similar conditions. Japanese troops typically fired 40 to 50 rounds per man per day, limited both by supply and by the bolt-action mechanics. Captured Japanese reports repeatedly described ammunition shortages and the shock of facing continuous American fire. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, commanding the 17th Army on Guadalcanal, wrote in November 1942 that enemy rifle fire had a density and accuracy beyond expectations. Each American soldier seemed to carry an automatic weapon, and Japanese formations could not gain fire superiority even with superior numbers. He recommended night operations and infiltration to blunt that firepower. By 1944, Japan's doctrine had shifted. Defensive orders for the Mariana Islands warned that the enemy's automatic rifles and machine guns create an impenetrable wall of fire during daylight and insisted that attacks be conducted at night or in bad weather. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, defending Iwo Jima, observed the same reality. The American automatic rifle changed the calculus of defense and attack. In short, the Garand was not just a new rifle, it embodied a different way to wage war. America's long investment in the rifle and in the industry behind it produced a level of sustained firepower that transformed small unit tactics and battlefield outcomes, and Japan's prior victories and cultural emphasis on spirit and discipline could not substitute for that material advantage. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi saw the truth clearly. Each American soldier, he wrote, has the firepower of 3 or 4 of ours. We must not waste lives in futile banzai charges against such weapons. Every meter of ground must be defended from fortifications. That mindset, avoiding suicidal assaults and relying on defense in depth, prolonged battles like Iwo Jima, but it couldn't overcome America's material superiority. Japan made several attempts to close the firepower gap. The Type 100 submachine gun, introduced in 1942, was meant to give infantry automatic capability, but only about 27,000 were ever made, far too few to matter. Worse, it fired the weak 8mm Nambu pistol round with limited range and stopping power for Pacific warfare. More telling was Japan's attempt to copy the M1 Garand itself. When American troops captured the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal in 1945, they discovered the Type 4 rifle project. Japanese engineers had reverse-engineered captured Garands, redesigning them to use the 7.7mm Japanese cartridge and a 10-round internal magazine fed by 2 5-round stripper clips. They even added small improvements, a rubber recoil pad, and a bolt hold-open feature after the last shot. But Japan's industry simply couldn't mass-produce such a complex weapon. Around 250 sets of parts were made, yet only about 100 to 125 rifles were ever assembled. The Type 4 program proved that Japan understood exactly why the Garand worked, but didn't have the machinery or materials to make it in any meaningful numbers. Cultural attitudes made the problem worse.
Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, a staff officer who served in several theaters, later admitted, "We knew the Americans had superior weapons, but saying it out loud would have destroyed morale. We had to keep faith in spiritual superiority, even as our soldiers were cut down by American fire." This resistance to realism extended into training. Even as late as 1944, Japanese infantry schools spent more time drilling bayonet charges and night infiltration than marksmanship. The official infantry manual devoted just 3 pages to rifle shooting and 12 to spiritual preparation and bayonet combat. That imbalance came from deep-rooted beliefs about war and honor that no amount of battlefield experience could easily change. Okinawa, from April to June 1945, would put those beliefs to their final test. On Japan's doorstep, 180,000 American troops faced 120,000 Japanese defenders in the bloodiest battle of the Pacific. Under Lieutenant General Michiru Ushijima, the Japanese abandoned reckless charges and built massive fortified positions into the island's rocky hills. But even in defense, the limitations of the bolt-action rifle were fatal. When American troops advanced, Japanese Arisakas simply couldn't put out enough fire to stop them. Medal of Honor recipient and medic Desmond Doss later said, "The Garands were firing so fast it sounded like one continuous roar. They kept the Japanese pinned down while I ran out for the wounded. If our men had bolt actions like theirs, I never could have saved those lives." On May 4, 1945, the Japanese launched their only major counterattack on Okinawa, 5,000 men striking under cover of their biggest artillery barrage of the war, 12,000 shells in 30 minutes. As the infantry emerged, they ran into a wall of American fire. Private Martin Brennan of the 17th Infantry recalled, "They came in waves but not the wild banzais we'd seen before. These were organized attacks with fire support. But our Garands just kept firing. 8 shots, ping, reload, 8 more. The noise was unbelievable. The Japanese might fire once or twice, then our semi-autos cut them down. The assault ended in slaughter. 4,000 Japanese dead against just 714 American casualties." The sheer weight of semi-automatic rifle fire, supported by machine guns and artillery, made courage irrelevant. Even when Japanese troops broke through to close range, the Garand's speed still decided the fight. Sergeant William Manchester, later a noted historian, fought on Okinawa with the 29th Marines. He remembered, "The M1 was our best friend. In that chaos, being able to fire 8 shots without working a bolt saved lives. I saw Japanese soldiers trying to work their bolts under fire, their hands shaking, while our guys just kept pulling triggers." Planning for Operation Downfall, the massive invasion of Japan scheduled for November 1945, assumed the Garand would again be central. Based on casualty rates at Okinawa, planners concluded overwhelming firepower would be essential to overcome the expected resistance. Production orders called for 500,000 new M1s, with Springfield Armory and Winchester turning out 2,000 rifles a day by August 1945, and International Harvester preparing a third line. Ammunition needs were staggering, 100 million rounds of Fortin sights every month for rifles alone. Intelligence estimates suggested Japan could field about 2.5 million Arisaka rifles in the homeland defense, plus millions more in the hands of civilian militias. But many were outdated training models or crude last-ditch single shots. The so-called substitute standard Type 99 rifles being produced in 1945 were so roughly made that U.S. intelligence analysts questioned whether they were even safe to fire.
American planners preparing for the invasion of Japan understood that firepower would decide everything. Every landing beach would have to be saturated with naval gunfire and bombed from the air before the troops even set foot on shore. Once the assault waves went in, it would be the M1 Garand that gave them the volume of fire they needed to break through Japanese defenses. Studies of Pacific Island battles showed that U.S. troops armed with semi-automatic rifles suffered about 40% fewer casualties than soldiers using bolt-action weapons under similar conditions. The Japanese, knowing they couldn't match that firepower, planned instead for a last desperate defense, suicide tactics, civilians pressed into service as human shields, and savage close-quarters combat in cities where the Garand's range advantage would matter less. Secret Japanese documents found after the war revealed just how desperate those plans were. Bamboo spears for civilians, suicide swimmers carrying explosive charges, even projects to unleash biological weapons. The proud Arisaka rifle, once a symbol of imperial precision, had been reduced to just one small piece in a doomed defense plan. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war before Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan, could begin. Post-war estimates suggested that invasion might have cost between 500,000 and 1 million American lives and several million Japanese. The Garand's superiority would have been crucial, but the price in blood would have been almost unimaginable. The M1's influence extended far beyond the war. The Soviet Union, which had struggled to mass-produce its own SVT-40 semi-automatic rifle, studied captured Garands closely and soon introduced the SKS carbine, clearly inspired by it. China's later Type 56 carbine was, in turn, a near copy of the SKS. France developed the MAS-49, blending lessons from the Garand and its own pre-war prototypes. Even conservative Britain, long content with its Lee Enfield, began designing semi-automatic rifles after the Belgian FN-49, the Swiss CW-57, and the Italian BM-59 all carried the DNA of the American success story. The Garand itself stayed in U.S. service through the Korean War, where it once again proved its worth. Against Chinese and North Korean troops armed mostly with bolt actions, American infantry repeatedly stopped massive human wave assaults, much like the old Japanese banzai charges, through sheer firepower. The rifle remained standard until the late 1950s, when it was gradually replaced by the M14. In a striking twist of history, the United States later equipped the newly formed Japanese self-defense forces with M1 Garands in the 1950s. Soldiers who had once faced the weapon now trained with it. About 150,000 Garands were supplied through U.S. military aid. Many Japanese veterans interviewed in the 1960s admitted that the rifle had been one of the decisive reasons for their defeat. Fighter ace Saburo Sakai summed it up: "We could match American courage, we could match their tactics, but we could never match their firepower. Every GI with his automatic rifle was worth 3 of our soldiers." Today, both the M1 Garand and the Arisaka are prized collector's items, though for very different reasons. The civilian marksmanship program has sold more than 500,000 surplus Garands to American citizens, and its distinctive ping remains one of the most recognizable sounds of World War II. The rifle appears in countless films, shows, and games. Its reputation as the greatest battle implement ever devised, in General Patton's words, still unchallenged. Modern competitions still feature Garand matches, and the rifles remain surprisingly accurate even by today's standards. Arisaka rifles, especially those with intact imperial chrysanthemum crests, are equally sought after. Because most rifles had the Emperor's symbol ground off before surrender, those few untouched examples are rare and valuable. Modern testing has shown that the Arisaka's bolt action is extraordinarily strong, even stronger than the Mauser or Springfield actions, but no engineering strength could overcome the limits of manual operation in a world that had moved on. Remarkably, both rifles have seen combat in the modern era. M1 Garands have surfaced in conflicts across the Middle East, often leftovers from Cold War-era military aid. Arisakas have been documented in Afghanistan and Myanmar, proof of their durability, even if they're hopelessly outdated on today's battlefield. Yet the lesson they embody was first written on a single October night at Henderson Field in 19... There, Private Robert Young Deere and thousands of other Americans showed what semi-automatic firepower could do. They demonstrated a truth that defined modern war: technology, backed by industry, decides victory, not courage alone. The M1 Garand delivered 40 to 50 aim shots per minute, compared to the Arisaka's 15 to 20, 8 rounds before reloading versus 5, a continuous cycle of fire instead of the pause and motion of working a bolt. One rifleman became a section of firepower unto himself and multiplied across divisions. That arithmetic decided the Pacific War. Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto, who led a charge on Henderson Field with his Type 38 Arisaka, never saw the His rifle was found afterward with 3 rounds still in the magazine. He'd fired only twice while advancing 100 yards into a wall of semi-automatic fire. Around him lay dozens of his men, their rifles still full, struck down before they could even return fire. The story of the Garand and the Arisaka isn't just about 2 rifles, it's about the nature of modern war itself. Courage and spirit may inspire, but they cannot outmatch the cold mathematics of firepower. By war's end, America had produced over 5.4 million Garands, arming nearly every soldier with semi-automatic capability. Japan, though it made more rifles overall, never escaped the mechanical limits of bolt-action design. Patton's praise, calling the M1 the greatest battle implement ever devised, wasn't exaggeration. It was fact, measured in survival. From the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal to the volcanic slopes of Iwo Jima, from the rains of Cape Gloucester to the blood-soaked ridges of Okinawa, the Garand proved itself more than a weapon. It was a force multiplier that reshaped the battlefield. Its metallic ping became the soundtrack of American victory, the sound of another charge stopped, another position overrun, another island secured. Against it, the Arisaka fought the last war with the last war's technology. In the end, the Pacific was won not by spirit or tradition, but by precision engineering, industrial strength, and the relentless rhythm of gas-operated fire. 8 rounds, 1 trigger pull at a time, then a ping, and the fight went on.